There's nothing that we're trying to track and understand and help people be accountable in the space of food. So that was very much of like why and how we got started. When we then landed on CGMs, we were mind blown about was the fact that what the companies at the time were doing with that data, it was very poorly put into context. And we said, we have to build something here. We said, in the next 48 hours, we're going to build like a metabolic glucose intervention program. I remember when we got our first order and we were like, what the hell is going on? Orders kept on coming and coming. And we took all of these learnings then out to build that scalable version of the product.
When does the Oura conversation begin?
A lot of our users were using Oura already. As we got to know each other, we understood that Oura is moving into metabolic, and metabolic is like a really big thing that we as well like want to be part of those conversations when it comes to nutrition, until we then sort of like made the decision that, hey, I think it makes sense for the companies to come together.
From an entrepreneur standpoint, how do you reason an acquisition about an exit?
I think about it solely from a vision point of view. Are you able to get there faster from a technological standpoint? And are you able to help more people by combining forces with someone as strong as Oura? From these two standpoints, this acquisition makes a lot of sense.
You are advising another founder that they want to sell their company. What would you advise them? What tactics should they do?
You should always have like more options than just that one option. Also, like good companies, they're not trying to sell, like they're going to be bought.
Anthony, big congrats on the latest acquisition with Oura. I saw the announcement, big news. So I wanted to have the discussion and get into the details of that. But first things first, let's start with the beginning of the story. How did you start, Veri? What gave you the idea?
Yeah, of course. So my own background is in competitive sports. So in my youth, I played football, soccer very wholeheartedly growing up, and that was a huge part of my life. Honestly speaking, like from when I learned to walk until then I stopped playing ball. But yeah, I think the big thing like regarding that journey from like 5 years old to about 16 years old, that 10 year almost like a decade journey was when football came to its end, and I had to stop due to an injury. And I went through a very rough period in my life of having sort of like post-surgery complications, not being able to anymore play on the level, which sort of like trickled down to issues with my mental health. And that was the first time that I truly recognized and understood how interconnected the human health and human body is, like your mind, how that is so connected, and your physical well-being. And out of all of the time that was freed from not anymore being able to play ball, I actually started like a first business of some sorts where I was trying to basically connect the best minds in the world of like performance to people that just like were willing to, pay for time to talk with professionals like in this space. And that was kind of like how I went into the space of metabolic health and like overall like human performance and fitness. Went to study life sciences, so bioinformatics, into Aalto University here in Helsinki, Finland, which after I was hired to work for a company in the Bay Area called Meru Health. So I joined the company very much due to the fact that I was very intrigued about mental health, and we were using biowearables to monitor the sort of like the effectiveness of breath work and how that has an impact on your mental health. And that journey taught me a lot of basically building companies in the health tech space. And at the time, me and my co-founder, who is as well like today is working at Oura, Vern, he was working for Oura back at the time. So this is like a full circle to him. But he was working with Oura at the time. And obviously, like one of the tasks that he was working on was thinking about the UX layer and like sort of like persuasive design. Like how do we change human behavior through software, like human computer interaction? And obviously I was at the same time working on the mental health sphere. He was working on sleep and exercise, which was what Oura was very heavily focused on back in the day. Obviously now there's a lot more new things that the wearable is able to capture pretty much using the same biometrics, a lot of other things as well these days. But at the time, that was like a very heavy focus, like a niche focus for the company. And we were thinking in our heads, we're tracking HRV, which has an impact on your sleep, which has an impact obviously on your stress levels. And we're tracking, heart rate as well. To understand, the effectiveness of your workouts and so on. But there's nothing that we're objectively trying to track and understand and help people be accountable of in the space of food, right? So that was very much of like why and how we got started. So we started looking at out a bunch of different things that we could do to add like accountability and like some level of like objectiveness to the things that we're eating, and tested out a lot of different things, like everywhere from like microbiome, lab testing, supplements. And when we then landed on discovered CGMs, I think we were mind blown about two factors. One was that this data is extremely important when we're trying to understand human metabolism. We as humans are very effective at metabolizing carbohydrates, like for energy production, right? Like that's how the citric acid cycle works. We are very, very good at that. And that's like majority of the energy production that the human body does. But we weren't having like any way of tracking that and understanding that, right? So we came back looking at the data saying, wow, this data is extremely, extremely interesting. And so many more people, not only diabetics, should have access to this technology. But the other thing that we were mind blown about was the fact that basically what the companies at the time were doing with that input or that output being the data, it was very poorly put into context of understanding, okay, when I eat this food, these ingredients, this is having this kind of an impact on my metabolic or on my glucose levels and my glucose, variability and as well like the spikes. And we said, we have to build something here, if not for anyone else, at least for ourselves, to understand better, like how do all of these different inputs that we're doing, like our food, activity, sleep, how is that having an impact on our metabolic health? And, then obviously, back and forth. So that really became like an obsession to us of like truly understanding that and building software for that. We built it for ourselves in the beginning, right? And we weren't expecting anyone to buy it. But there was a lot of people, like our friends first, who came saying, I want to have access to that as well. That's extremely interesting. And then from friends, like word of mouth just like spread to people that were second connections, third connections, people that we didn't know at all, who said, I would love to have a CGM. I've been looking for a software that puts glucose data into puts it into like a better context and gives information on, okay, like if I do these certain actions, like say, for example, I drink orange juice that has a huge spike on my glucose levels. I want to see that. And I want like some sort of guidance of like, what should I be then replacing in my diet instead of drinking orange juice and having an oatmeal breakfast in the morning?
Super. You mentioned, I want to ask two questions on that. You mentioned Bay Area. How did you go to the Bay Area in the first place? And then second, what happened with, you had the idea, you wanted to build this for yourself. You got the first users, but when did this become a business? What was the first product? What did it look like?
When we got started with Veri, we were building the product for ourselves, as I said. So we were building the product for ourselves. It wasn't supposed to necessarily become a business. We were just curious. Curiosity leads to a lot of great things, right? Like when you're just curious about something and you want to solve something and you have the tools to solve something, you just go out and start building things. And I think, for us, it was very much of like, we thought that we were crazy in a way. Like we thought no one is going to want to put a needle in their arm. It's not a needle, it's a filament, but put anything in their arm that is like that level of invasive and monitor their glucose levels without having diabetes. And as we talked about, why it is so important for us to understand from a prevention standpoint and from a personalization standpoint, of why glucose is such an interesting metric to truly understand how how the state of your metabolic health is now, but especially how it will evolve if you continue doing the actions that you are doing currently. And that can have like very significant impact on, sort of like your health outcomes and your longevity and health span. People started getting interested. Like first it was our friends who said, hey, I totally buy what you're saying. I understand. I should probably have a go at this thing and understand, what is the state of my metabolic health right now and what direction is it going to? And then there was like a point in time where we said, there has to be other people out there as well that are interested in understanding this. So what we actually did at the time, we were at the Bay Area and we were very connected with a certain executive on Facebook, or Meta these days. And he said, hey, Facebook Meta is putting a lot of effort into groups. You should build like a group in Facebook that would basically facilitate like-minded people with certain keywords. So we went out to build that Facebook group and we called it CGM for non-diabetics. It's an active group even today. There's quite a lot of people there that are talking about, using CGMs, like the insights that they're finding being non-diabetics and, what are sort of like hacks that they can do in order to improve their metabolic health. Well, we started that group and Lord and behold, we just started seeing people flooding into the group and basically saying that, hey, I want a CGM. Where can I get a CGM? Then the very natural follow-up question is, I tried a CGM, but the software is bad. Is there better software that I can download from the App Store to basically better contextualize this? So that was like a very clear go sign for us that we have to build software in this space to cater this audience. So the first thing that we did, actually, we didn't just sort of like go out there and build software it was still like a small signal. Like this is, tens of people, not hundreds of people. This is tens of people. So we said at the time, we were at the Bay Area and I remember we were coming from the airport back to our place in Burlingame, California, and like a bit south from San Francisco. And I think we set a goal with Vern saying, in the next 48 hours, we're going to build like a metabolic glucose intervention program. And that is going to entail, we're going to send a CGM to our customers. We are going to ask them to send data from chronometer, from if they have an Oura ring or an Apple Watch, export data and send it to us, chronometer, food, exercise and sleep, Oura or Apple Watch. And we're going to put the data together in an Excel file, build like a nice report to them, and have 2 calls with them in the beginning, how to insert the sensor, how to get started with everything. And then in the end, where we're going to, after the 14 days, we're going to analyze their data for them and basically show, hey, these things we're seeing in your data. And these are some of the things that we would suggest based on, at that moment, 9 months of continuous CGM usage, and obviously like diving super deep out of our curiosity to glucose and metabolism and so on. These are sort of like the guidance or the insights that we would give you guys to improve the state of your metabolic health. And we did that in 48 hours and launched it. And I remember when we got our first order and we were like, what the hell is going on? Orders kept on coming and coming. And during that 3-week period, at the end of 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we were at a place where our calendars were full of meetings with these customers. So we basically took this opportunity. Like I very much, like, one of my favorite blog pieces about company building like early stages is from Paul Graham, do things that don't scale, or build things that don't scale, which I think that we took that to heart when we went out and built Veri. We said, we're not going to build any piece of technology if we do not have to. We're going to flood our calendars and learn from our customers as we are as well, like, making money, out of the fact that we're sending these CGMs and productizing something that, well, isn't scalable at all. It was tremendous way of understanding what is the ICP? What is the ideal customer profile that we're trying to cater? Who does this work well with? Who are the people that are like most sticky, who retain the best? And all of these things. And we took all of these learnings then out to build that scalable version of the product when we just couldn't anymore like extend, our hours in the day. We had to sleep as well. So we couldn't flood our, like night times of like speaking with customers um everywhere around the US essentially.
Super. Do things that don't scale. We have a very similar philosophy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And then
It's the right philosophy.
exactly. So then you get all of that information and you convert it into the product. What did that first product look like? What was the one thing that you are trying to solve, or did you focus on the nutrition element, into the sleep element? What was that very first product?
I think that the one thing that like the few things that we learned was truly the fact that I think like very early on we understood that yes, the first sort of like frontier of the market is going to be extremely like biohacker type of people. Like these people who are going to willing to try everything under the sun and just learn as much as possible about their bodies as God wills. And the the thing that we also understood there pretty early, which we didn't necessarily address in the beginning, was that this group of customers is extremely unloyal, unfortunately. Like this group of customers is basically going to use your product, test it out, and then say, okay, I learned everything that I had to learn. And I think, going back and thinking about it more, could we have sort of like hopped across that audience and define our ICP better of saying, actually, we want customers to be a bit closer to when we think about metabolic health and we think about the extremely healthy biohackers, and we think about the less healthy people who are, sort of like perimenopause, like around the age of like, in the mid, in their 50s, in their 40s, 50s, who are just trying to stay healthy, and they're seeing these changes happening in their body and they can't really understand it. Like, in college, they could drink like a 6-pack or an 8-pack of beer and like not see you know, any impact on their body. But if they try and, reproduce that trick today, the next day, and, the scale is going to be horrible. Right. So I think like one of the things that we recognized and realized pretty early there, which we necessarily didn't address immediately, pretty quickly after it, was that this ICP in this space is actually the people that this is more of a painkiller than a vitamin. Which we then went on and changed like later on as the market matured and we started sort of like being able to talk with these customers more.
What's that audience actually? Would you say it's the 40s and 50s you mentioned, or what is you find?
Yeah, well, like I think that the audience right now, that this product is like the most sticky to, and the product like where we can really drive like meaningful health outcomes is more of the audience who is metabolically challenged, right? So we saw a lot of customers who, were insulin resistant. They knew it, and they were having like all of these issues that they couldn't explain. And immediately when you fix that portion of like, okay, we're going to try to make you insulin sensitive instead of you being insulin resistant by decreasing the variance in your glucose and improving your lifestyle habits, across the board, they saw the biggest changes in their health. And because of those changes, they were as well like very committed of continuing. Right. So I think that was that was a big insight for us in the beginning. The other thing that I will say in terms of like the insights was that, like all of those discussions that we had, like the biggest wow element in the product at the time was truly nutrition. And if I drilled a bit deeper into nutrition, the biggest insight was those foods that you thought that are healthy, and you are now seeing your glucose like spike off the roof from some of these things that you thought was healthy. So one good example that we like to give is, for example, OG orange juice and oatmeal. For a lot of our customers, they would think, let me have a very healthy morning breakfast, no bacon, none of that crap, just a porridge and oatmeal, and an orange juice. And you will see glucose just like spike like crazy. And then you're like, wow, like what? Like everything that I knew about the world, like just trembled. I don't understand anything anymore about, what has been like traditionally sort of like thought to me as being healthy. So one of the things that we built in the first version of the product, which we were lacking a lot in our previous execution, was we built a meal score. So together with our advisors, together with people that we trusted and saw like a lot of credibility in the space of metabolic health, we went out and said, we want a very simple, like school grade score on the foods that you're eating based on your postprandial glucose response and based on as well like your variance in between like that 2 hour time window that your glucose metabolizes. So that was like the really like the big feature and insight that truly drive the most value like in the beginning. And I will even argue even towards the end, like at like 5 years, when we looked at our data and we looked at, okay, what are the things that users are spending the most time on which screens and so on. Those screens were the meal score screen and then the glucose basically curve screen. So a lot of all of that additional value, and this is like a good thing as well, like to maybe mention about products overall. Typically the problem that you go out and solve and the first feature that you go out and ship is going to remain the main feature for the entirety of the company and the entirety of the bigger reason to buy the product, right? It truly like it was definitely that for us as well, of like basically being able to contextualize your food, looking at your glucose exposure was truly the biggest thing that people are paying money and gaining the most value. And those were driving like the most meaningful health outcomes at the end of the day.
Speaking about the meal score, what's the science behind that, and what approach did you have in it? Was it very complex? Was it related to the goal of the individual, for example, or was it related to the insulin reaction of that person? And if you can give us some details there.
Everything that we build, we always run it through like our scientific advisory board, right? So these people are experts and have done like plenty of studies like around human metabolism, and like all of the innovation that we did at the company, we basically went through them, seek for their guidance, exposed our algorithms and said, does this make sense? Like, this is how we've been thinking about it based on this and this research. Does this make sense? And very typically, like what we would hear and learn from them is that, yes, like essentially it makes sense, but we have to make some adjustments here, right? So we would then go out together and adjust those metrics so that, they take into consideration like the latest science and the robustness of like what the score can be. So we put a lot of effort into, the science of the product and all of the scores and the metrics that we develop, definitely. And sort of like answering your follow-on question there in terms of that is the goal itself. Like, so how we think about the goals, like, no, necessarily we didn't personalize them based on like the goals of what the individuals had. We went about it more of like, hey, this is table stakes, like this is same for everyone, right? So when you think about sort of like metabolic health, it's very hard to argue that significant glucose spikes and like exposures would be healthy in like given like any circumstance what you're trying to do. So even you were trying to basically gain weight or lose weight, it's still going to be the same, right? Because typically what those foods are that are going to cause like a extreme like glucose exposure are things that are highly processed and are things that, have like very heavy amounts of like sugar and sort of like processed ingredients. Though I will say, we did do like, there was this point in time which we realized at some point, which was that you can drink like a glass of canola oil or you can eat a Big Mac and you're gonna see a good score because it doesn't have any carbohydrates. Does that mean that drinking like a flask of like, of canola oil is healthy for you? No. Does that mean a Big Mac is healthy for you? No way, right? So one thing that we went on later, late last year, what we developed is something that we call like a composite meal score. So this again, like as well, like this problem, we ran it through our scientific advisory board and said, hey, there's a problem. We have people who are basically getting like 8s and 9s on a Big Mac. How do we fix this? So what we did is we basically developed using like large language models. We developed basically like a system where we can understand as well like other conditions, like what a specific ingredient or food can have. So basically understanding that, okay, like what is the level of processing that each ingredient is basically going through in the production, sort of like in the production of that like end ingredient, but also as well like understanding sort of like the macro split of those foods, understanding like how much is like saturated, unsaturated fats, and basically then giving like kind of like a composite meal score of putting them together, right? So now if you eat a Big Mac and you're using Veri, like you're not going to see an 8 score, you're going to see a lot lower scores because of that composite meal score update that we did on our meal score algorithm. So a lot of those sorts of things that we then did, not necessarily to personalize the scores, but sort of like smoothen the edges of like an imperfect system, which I'm not saying is perfect even today, but significantly improved from where we got started.
Very interesting. Now, in terms of distribution growth, how do you go from the first few users into, I believe I read somewhere that you have about 50,000 users. How do we go from the unscalable way into the scalable way of customer acquisition?
Yeah. So something interesting to understand about this space, it's a lot about education, right? Like when you say metabolic health to the stranger on the street, like they're not going to know what you're talking about. Maybe today, but that definitely wasn't the situation 3 years ago, right? So when we got started with growth, we did a lot of work in terms of like one thing was just like we truly need to have the best product out there. Like the best software layer needs to be Veri. And we built our team, we built everything that we did for that. And I think that's big reason why this acquisition as well, like was done, because Oura truly fell in love with the user experience that we had built. And I think we got a lot of praise from that, from our customers, changing from competition and saying Veri's UX is just like, so much more better than what I'm seeing like out there. This just like works a lot better to me. I understand. It gives me like the context a lot better, is like decluttered and so on and so forth. And I peg that a lot to, our roots as a Finnish company, as like a very minimalistic and kind of like, no nonsense, like, culture. That truly is sort of like what we tried to capture in the very beginning. But a lot of it was just like word of mouth purely in the beginning. So a lot of people were basically telling their friends how this thing has like changed and so many things about my life, and how, I'm now like having like such a different outlook into nutrition and food by understanding, these deeper levels of like what's going on in my body, physiologically speaking. But then I think like over time, like we saw that we need to do a lot of education. We need to do a lot of education. And we approached education from a standpoint of like, we tried to find the best possible people out there to talk about our product in the right way, like the scientifically like right way. And as well, like, the best minds and sort of like the personas who could represent our brand to the outside world. So we started working with a lot of affiliates in the space who were basically proponents of metabolic health, and got affiliated with a lot of these people who are then like spreading out the word and basically teaching as well, like what is the benefit of this all, right? There was a lot of ways of going about it. You could have built a really good like learning center, like a blog, type of SEO type of strategy, which, Levels, that is a tremendous company in this space, was able to execute absolutely fantastically. And I have like a huge respect to the team for pulling that off. I think it as well, like influenced like so many other companies in the space, by the way, how they were basically able to educate the market at mass. But we took the affiliate route, very much so. And then later on, like something that came as a contingent almost to the affiliate route was that we understood back in like 2022 beginning, we understood that a lot of the affiliates who we were talking with are as well nutritionists and dietitians. So we started talking with a lot of these people and asking them like, what do you need? Like, what is missing out of sort of like the product palette, so to say, that you're missing? And what we learned there was super interesting. So we understood that they would like to have like some way of monitoring their customers like glucose levels from far. Obviously, COVID has made like telehealth like explode. A lot of people are working from home as dietitians, like, you know, doing Zoom calls and basically giving diet counseling like over video. So they wanted to be in separate places, seeing their customers' data in real time, and then being able to guide them in their daily behavior to go to the right direction or do the right actions for their metabolic health. So we actually started then developing something that we call the coaching dashboard. So we built a dashboard for the coaches where they could sync their customers. So, you know, you would basically get the dashboard, a customer would scan a QR code and would be automatically paired with the coach. And then the coach would have access to your data and be able to give you guidance in real time. This would list out all of their meals, all of their activities, their steps, like their whole day would basically be visualized to the coaches. And this then became like a significant growth strategy for us where we started seeing like a lot of word of mouth. A lot of the coaches started basically referring other coaches, running webinars to help, you know, their coaches taking basically, their coaches taking a stance on, you know, I want to enter this era. Like I want to be part of ushering this new era of personalized, you know, food as medicine movement. And that is what I'm going to be able to do. I'm going to be able to drive, you know, 10x more value to my customers because I don't now have to anymore give sort of like subjective guidance on what you should and what you shouldn't do. I can give objective guidance based on your data and help you truly understand what are the right things for you. And then just like sheer like economical or financial standpoint, these coaches were able to charge a lot higher rates and fees because they are now giving something of 10x value to customers. So that was like a very interesting flywheel that then like sort of like has pushed our growth towards like this point over the course of the last, you know, year or so.
That's very interesting. So how do you advertise to coaches themselves? Was this again a word of mouth strategy, or did you go to certain gyms, for example, or how did you approach it?
Yeah, we did a lot of like outreach, honestly speaking. A lot of it came like pretty naturally, like organically of like word of mouth. But when we started seeing word of mouth, obviously we wanted to, you know, sort of like respond to that of like, hey, we got to do outreach. So we started reaching out to a lot of like bigger sort of like distribution centers, like, you know, like sort of like centrums where you have like a lot of nutritionists and dietitians and started sort of like, you know, talking with them, talking with the head organization. So like at the end, we, for example, did a partnership with British Association of Nutritional Therapy, which holds like thousands and thousands of dietitians and registered dietitians like under their roof. So we basically started working with them, like a lot of similar players in the US who we affiliated ourselves with as well. And that was the way how we were able to pull, you know, like really like big masses of coaches that then were able to basically associate with the platform. And the beauty about that is obviously you acquire one coach, what you get is, you know, over the course of their lifetime, you get tens of customers.
When does the Oura conversation begin?
So we had a partnership with Oura, which we did in late last year. And that partnership was basically, we saw in like a lot of our users were using Oura Ring, like a lot of our users, tens of percentages were using Oura Ring to basically import their sleep and exercise data into the app. Obviously, you know, that integration was just purely through Apple Health. So we didn't have like a native integration with them or anything like that. So we were just seeing that the source is that. And we said, hey, you know, if we are able to sort of like bring some of the insights that Oura is bringing, like in addition to, you know, sort of like not that like perfect of integration that Apple Health does, are we able to bring a lot more value to our customers? Yes or no? So that's when we started actually talking with Aura first time of like, we said, hey, we would love to sort of like integrate, like do an API integration between like Aura and Veri, bring more value to our customers. And I think that that was the time when we understood as well, like there's a lot of overlapping users between the Aura and Veri platform. So, again, like tens of percentages of the customers were using Aura Ring. Our customers were using Aura. So that as well, like then became a sort of like developed into a discussion with Tom of, hey, is there something that we can build together which we can't build alone, given the sheer amount of sort of like overlapping customer data and like input that we have, right? So that was sort of like kind of like the conversation starter in a way, even though like I don't think that it necessarily like matured into that. I think as we got to know each other, we understood that, you know, Aura is moving into metabolic and they want to basically be able to build like a more ever more like holistic view and picture on human health and be sort of like in the intersection of all of these key moments what comes to like human health development from 18 to 65 plus. And metabolic is like a really big thing that from the very beginning at Aura, what I've understood from the very beginning, it's always been that we as well like want to, you know, be part of those conversations when it comes to nutrition. Because if you think about like, what is Aura trying to achieve and accomplish as like what is Various as well, like trying to accomplish, like all of these companies are trying to basically help people live longer and live healthier longer, right? So when you think about 79% of the premature deaths globally happening through like irrecoverable like diseases, start thinking preventable diseases, essentially nutrition is a huge part of that. Nutrition is a huge part of that, and being able to capture that and put that into context, like even better, really became like a discussion and a topic, which we then sort of like deepened into towards this year, like earlier this year, until we then sort of like made the decision that, hey, I think it makes sense for the companies to come together. Like this metabolic agenda has grown enough strong inside of the Aura org that we really want to move here. And from our point of view, we were at a point where we said, we are truly interested in being able to build something like from a technological standpoint, building something that has not been done before from sort of like glucose monitoring and metabolic sensing point of view. Aura owns the hardware. So that became like a very obvious discussion then to have and sort of like to bundle in to, catering the Aura audience and so on.
From an entrepreneur standpoint, how do you reason about an acquisition, about an exit?
Very good question. Amazing question. I think there's a few lenses to look at that. Like first thing is like every acquisition is unique and every founder is unique as well. But from my point of view, what I can say is I look at sort of like this space that we're in from the lens that I basically went through myself. And when I was sick, when I didn't have the help around me, I was lost with not having a solution for a problem, right? And today we are at a point where there's so many companies out there trying to solve different corners of the same problem. And I had to that because I have been in a position where that wasn't true. So I can sort of like, I can get into the terms, even I'm a very competitive person, come from a competitive like sport background. I can reason why it's good that there is like other companies as well, in addition to you solving this problem, because it's going to basically push the innovation and the solutions forward faster. And it's going to mature the market even further. So when I think about like reasoning the acquisition, I think about it solely from a vision point of view. I think about it from a point of view of like, okay, are we able to get things done faster from a technological standpoint? Because, obviously we know that there's a lot of barriers of entry into this space. And there's a lot of complications that come to, the form factor of glucose monitoring and so on, which is just like, and as well, like the economical or the economic lens to it, which is like these sensors are very expensive. So are you able to get there faster from a technological standpoint? And are you able to help more people by combining forces with someone as strong as Aura? And that was very much of the lens that I looked at it. And I said, from these two standpoints, this acquisition makes a lot of sense. And, I think it depends so much on what you're working on, why you're working on what you're working on. But for me, that was like a very clear sign of like, yes, this makes a lot of sense.
Can you put me into your shoes when you announce to the company, to Veri, to the employees, into your team, when you make the announcement, what's happening?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it was kind of like, how would I explain it? I think I've never really felt as bittersweet as I have when I wrote that message. And let me sort of like explain the bitterness of it. We've hired every single person into this company from a very similar set of values that I come from, right? So everyone in the company has joined because they have had, or their loved ones or someone important has had like health complication, some health complication. And they've come to sort of like the sort of like realization or awareness that health is the greatest wealth. That is the greatest wealth that we humans hold. And because of that, they've decided that I want to put majority of my time that I'm not sleeping to work for this company solving this specific problem. Okay. So what then happens like in companies like these, it is very customer focused because you can so well resonate with every single one of your customers and understand truly the pain that there is of taking something away from them that they've built or that we've built, right? So the bitterness comes from the fact that we sort of like had to take a step back and say, okay, Veri's product is going to cease to exist for a temporary period of time until we can build something similar into the Aura ecosystem and have our customers basically join us on this side, slide this ring into their hand, and then being able to do similar things that Veri was able to accomplish, right? So I think that the big bitterness came from that of like being able to explain the people that have built the company, like blood, sweat, and tears into putting all of this stuff into together in a relatively short period of time with a relatively small team as well. I think that the competition that there is in the space, like have like a bit bigger teams that we have. We've been like very nimble and small, like all the time. So everyone has worked like really, really hard on building what we've built. So, that was challenging, like very, very challenging and bitter. But from the sweet side or from sort of like what was sweet about it was, again, like all of the things that I said, I think that everyone can resonate with the fact that, Aura is obviously a tremendous company and like tackling health from such a like a so much more larger standpoint than Veri like solely was tackling it from. And we are a Finnish company at the end of the day. Aura is Finnish as well, and Finland is a small place. Like we have 5.6 million people, and Aura is very fast, like trending towards like being one of the biggest like outcomes coming from the Finnish tech market. So every single person in Finland knows Aura, right? So I'm obviously as well like telling them that, hey, we're going to go to Aura and continue our work. So you can be very sure that a lot of people will be excited about the fact that they get to join like a trailblazer company and we'll get to continue doing what we're doing, even though we have to take a step back.
You are advising another founder, another entrepreneur that they want to sell their company. What would you advise them? What tactics should they do? What did you learn from that they can learn?
I think it's super important to align on like what the culture and the values in the company are that you're going to. Like those might seem like softer and might seem like, things that are kind of like, secondary to like what are the financial terms of the deal. But I think that, looking ahead, like those things are going to be truly, truly important because, when you step into inside the doors of the acquiree, like you have to be very sure that the things that you have basically, the values and culture that you have developed with your team, like needs to stay like somewhat like level. because the team will feel like horrible, like stepping into something that they can't appreciate at all. And they just like don't resonate with it. And what then ends up happening is, the team start leaving right, left and right. And that is a super bad outcome. That ends up being like a very, unsuccessful acquisition or a merger of these two companies coming together. So I think like that's really like one of the things that I would focus on a lot. And we did a lot of like discussing with Tom and with the rest of the C-suite team of understanding like what are the values, like how are you working, like what are the ways of working, even though like obviously we're speaking of like 25 people versus like 700 people organization pretty much already. So obviously those things are going to be slightly different of how do you work, but the culture needs to be like somewhat the same. And I'm very, very happy about the fact that, the culture is very much similar to what we had at Veri. Like we have very much of like overlapping values of being human first and, pushing our boundaries, like doing tremendous things and always sort of like innovating and as well, like sort of like, the transparency and all of these things that we have and we held like very dearly in our company seem to be also true here at Oura, which, I think all of the team is like very excited and pumped about. Sort of like maybe on a bit like other things as well. Like I think maybe this is like a culture thing as well, but you should just like not rush into it and just like spend time of like just getting to know like the top leadership in the company and understanding, what is the vision, like what's their plan, like how do you see it? Because it's like very similar to like a partnership, right? Like if you don't understand truly, what problem you're going there and you're trying to solve, again, like that acquisition will fall flat and on its face, right? So being able to truly understand, what are the KPIs that you're measuring, like by, doing this acquisition? What do you want to achieve? What are you expecting from us? What are you expecting that we're going to bring into the house? Having like enough time to truly understand those things and not just get, excited about like dollar figures and, oh, like I'm going to make this and this amount of money. Like that's, many people will have time to build like, a lot of companies and you'll have a lot of like, if you work hard, you're going to have like good outcomes. Like they will follow. Right. So, wouldn't sort of like spend too much time there, but also I think that point is as well, like important, right? Like you have to basically be able to say, the work that we did here, all of the opportunities I said no to, I have to be like some level like compensated for all of those trade-offs that I took. Right. And I think they're sort of like approaching like discussions with like an acquisition or acquiree is like, you should always have like more options than just that one option. Like if you can't walk away, you can't walk away and you'll take whatever is granted to you. Right. So if you are sort of like in a position where, you're considering an acquisition, you should probably entertain like a lot of discussions at the same time, have like a plan A, plan B, and a plan C. And then, just if you can get the plan A in like terms that you defined at the beginning, which is like, these are good terms, I'll take the deal if I can take them with this, then you just like walk to plan A. But if you sort of like break those, then you should have like plan B and C like in your pocket to walk away. Sometimes and often that sort of like turns like plan A will come back and say, okay, we're willing to do what plan B is willing to do. So, having those options, I think is very important, in an acquisition situation. Also like, which is going to sound like very unflattering, and kind of like harsh is like good companies, good companies they're not trying to sell, like they're being, but they're going to be bought. Right. So, also sort of like that aspect to it, which is like, you should try to play your cards in a way where someone, the other party is basically saying, we want to buy you and you're not like, we want to sell to you if possible.
There is from the people I spoke with in the past in the podcast, there seems to be two schools of thought. One of it is there's going to be more devices over time. There's going to be more biomarkers. There's going to be more information. And the other one is there's going to be only one device. It's going to be from one company. It's going to be measuring all of the information. Which one do you think is going to be the future?
Yeah, this is kind of like an endless topic that I've as well, like, racked my brains like on like for the past 5 years of like understanding, like, is there going to be like a vertical or a horizontal play, right? Like what is going to happen in this space? And I think, I think, you know, like just sort of like singling it out into there being like one company. I don't think that that's going to be true. I think there's going to be multiple companies. I think that the more interesting question, or not necessarily like a more interesting, but maybe like a way to scope in is like, is there going to be, is the market going to resemble more of like the, you know, like a smartphone market, or like like computer electronics market where you have the Apple of the world that is like, you know, vertically integrated, right? Like Apple does hardware, Apple does software, and you know, that's the end all of it. And then you have like the other players that are maybe like a bit more horizontal, right? Like you've got, you know, Microsoft that has like the software layer, and then you have like all of the equipment companies that are basically then like building the hardware, but then they are lending like the software from Microsoft, or basically licensing the software from Microsoft. So, you know, I think that's sort of like the question that remains to be seen. I don't know if you read the Andreessen Horowitz blog post about the biggest company in the world. And I think, you know, I think like if we sort of like follow that train of thought, I think that there's going to be like one company in this space that is going to be like tremendously big in terms of like just being able to kind of like start from like the D2C, you know, move to B2B, and then like move into like sort of like the value-based care, like healthcare model, being able to do all of these things like successfully, be a bit lucky to be able to move across like all of these different development points. Um, and, um, and you know, like if we think about it like from a hardware software point of view, I truly believe that like in terms of like the, you know, the economics of the business, like the margins, if you're able to control like that whole like vertical integration into building like all of the things yourself, I think you have a very good shot in this market of being like the company. There's not a lot of companies that can truly do that anymore, right? Like it's just a handful of companies that have like, you know, the benefit of like having started like, you know, 10 years ago, like Aura, for example, like Aura was, Aura was founded like 2010, right? And they have like done like very, very tedious work on the hardware side. And now they're basically being able to sort of like move, you know, towards all of these steps, and because they own like that whole part. Um, but, um, but yeah, it remains to be seen, I guess. It remains to be seen. But sort of like where I put my chips is sort of like that vertical integration of like owning the hardware, owning the software, because as well, like I think like where we're moving towards as a humanity, like we have like so much of we have so many companies in like software space, right? We have so many companies like in the software space, and you know, like I really truly believe that the need to build like very seamless, good software and like firmware, hardware is integral. And if you're trying to basically put two companies that have like a bit different sort of like agendas together and saying, okay, you know, let's try and put these things together and make it like magical, like Apple, it's just very difficult. I don't think that it's like, coincidence that Apple is like one of the biggest companies or the biggest company in the space of like computer electronics.
Do you know in the acquisition now? Do you know what position? How is Veri going to be within Oura? What position would you have? Your co-founder, all the team members? Is this going to be like a separate product acting individually, or have you discussed these things? Do you know what's going to happen internally?
Yeah, so the team at Veri will form like the metabolic squad at Aura. So, you know, our sole mission inside of Aura is going to be able to basically develop and bring this new you know, feature set and these even like to the sensing capabilities eventually to build inside of like the Aura value proposition. So that's going to be a lot of the things that we're going to work on, like everywhere around, like go to market, from like commercial partnerships of like working with different partners, right? Like Aura has taken a huge stance on like basically being like the most partnered company in the space of like, you know, wearables and health. So we're partnering with like a lot of companies and trying to basically grow our sort of like awareness and just sort of like overall like um, market awareness through like all of these amazing partnerships that we've done with like Strava, with Open, with Natural Cycles, with a lot of these companies that are basically adding superpowers to our stack, but also with the form factor of the ring, we are adding superpowers to their stack, right? So a lot of the work that we are going to be doing at Veri is basically being able to build the go-to-market and metabolic like features as part of like Aura's value proposition.
Super. For my last question, if we go 100 years into the future and we look backwards, what would you say are the biggest mistakes that you would know that we're doing today in the space of health?
I think when we go like 100 years, I don't know if it's a mistake. Maybe it's sort of like slow pace, but I think in 100 years we go, I talk with, my grandkids, right? I talk with them, I have a discussion about sort of like this space, and they are like, are you crazy? Like, you are missing out on so many things that you could have prevented through technology by not adapting this technology faster, right? So maybe I'm not the right person, but maybe someone who is kind of like resisting to this movement of basically being able to, understand from pretty subtle form factors now of understanding very tremendous and important vital data of your body and where are you trending to in terms of like, illness, of basically being resistant to this idea. They were going to be like, that's a no-brainer. Like, you should have done that like always, right? So I don't know if it's necessarily a mistake. Maybe the mistake is that we're not like putting enough resources and moving faster to this direction. But I think that's going to be something that we're going to talk about in 100 years and say, hey, that was a no-brainer. Like, why didn't you just like move on and solve like tougher problems?
Anthony, that was an awesome discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here, man.